8.1 Simple Interest. If you look at this formula, I equals PRT, this is a formula that represents simple interest. I call it the I-PRT formula. The I-PRT formula has very important features, and in this unit we're going to be looking at financial equations, business equations that are used in business and in banking to be able to have interest values, and also when you have mortgages and loans. Now, what's important here, folks, is to look at, for example, the capital letters versus the lowercase letters. This means that when we look at the capital letters and the lowercase letters, we're looking at what they represent. For example, the capital I represents dollar values, money, all right? And so does the capital P. And in fact, anything in this unit, we're going to be looking at capital letters representing dollar values. So let's start with understanding what these values are. I represents the interest as a dollar value. So this is money that either, for example, you would get from a bank because you decide to invest money, or interest could actually be money that you owe the bank. For example, if you get a loan to be able to buy a car, or you get a loan, a mortgage, to be able to buy a house. So interest is the money you owe as a favor of borrowing that money. Now, capital P stands for principal. Principal is also a dollar value because, again, all the capital letters represent a dollar value. Specifically, the principal, the dollar value, represents the original or the initial amount invested or borrowed. So you borrow a certain amount of money, that is known as the principal. If you invest a certain amount of money, that's known as the principal. So that's the initial amount that you invest. R represents the rate of interest. Now, the rate of interest is always, folks, as a decimal. Now, when it's recorded as a percent. The rate of interest actually turns out to be a decimal value that you're looking for. T represents time in years. The time in years, again, you're not always given the information in years. You could be given in days or months or any of those other values. But very important, in the simple interest formula, the T represents the time in years, okay? Now, what happens if you're given it to in days or weeks or months and things like that? But before we do that, we have to understand one more capital letter, and that is A. A is the total amount. So a total amount, which includes the principal plus the interest value. That's a future amount, folks. And the P and the I are just the principal plus the interest added together. That gives you the total amount. Now, let's talk about years. What can years also be? Now, if you're given in a different value, you must convert to years. How do you do that? Well, days, there are a certain number of days in a year. There are a certain number of weeks in a year. Bi-weekly in a year. Monthly in a year. So daily, weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, and annually. What do these words mean? Well, folks, these are words that we're going to see quite frequently in this unit. And so these are very, very special words. We're going to note them as the word. We'll see that more importantly in the next couple of units. Daily represents that how many days are there in a year? That's right, folks, 365. Weekly, how many weeks in a year? That's right, folks, if you're paid weekly, you're going to be paid 52 times in a year. Bi-weekly, how much are you paid bi-weekly in a year? Okay, here we go again. That's right, folks, 26 times a year. So those of us who get a paycheck every 2 weeks, we would get 26 paychecks every year. Monthly, what does monthly represent? Monthly represents 12 months in a year. Quarterly represents 4 times a year. There are 4 quarters in a year, 4 quarters in a dollar. So, folks, what we're trying to do here is that if we ever see something that we invest quarterly, we know that happens 4 times a year. Semi-annually, well, folks, semi-annually means twice a year and annually means once a year. We're going to see these words pop up a little more importantly in the next couple of units. Again, I note these words as the word. These are the word, and the word is really important, especially when we look at compound interest. But fortunately for today, we're only looking at simple interest. So, example 1. Determine the simple interest earned on each investment. How much is the entire investment worth? So this is what we need to do. So, how do we do this? Well, $550 is deposited for 5 years and earns 2.2% per annum simple interest. What does that mean? Well, the 550 is a dollar value. And remember I told you that dollar values have to do with capital letters. So 550 here represents the P. That's how much is deposited, invested, or borrowed. In this case, deposited. 5 years, thankfully for us, this is represented in years, so this is just our time. Time is 5, and 2.2% per annum simple interest. This /A means per annum. This has nothing to do with the word yet, folks. What we do have to do is look at this percent, and this percent is our R value, okay? So we're going to have to convert that to a decimal. I know it looks like a decimal right now, folks, but percent means that we have to per, divide, or out of. Cent in French is 100. Cent, it's 1 cent for every, there's 100 cents for every dollar, so percent is divide by 100. Anytime we see a percent, we want to divide that by 100. So I is something we don't know. P is something we do know. That is the $550. A little r is the rate of interest, which we take 2.2 and divide that by 100. And finally, the time is 5. What we want to do here is calculate the simple interest value, which turns out to be here, folks, $60.50. Now, to find the total amount, because that's how much the entire investment is worth, we take 550, add $60.50, and it turns out that our total investment is worth $610.50. All right, let's try another one. Part B, $6,000 is deposited for 7 years and earns 2.5% per annum simple interest. What does that mean? Well, we have a dollar value, so that's our P value. We have 7 years, that's our T value, and 2.5% simple interest means we're going to take 2.5 and divide it by 100. So, we're going to take, in the I-pretty formula, because it says simple interest, we don't know what the I is, P is 6,000, R is 2.5 divided by 100, and T is 7. We're going to plug it in. I equals 6,000 times 0.025. Don't forget, folks, another way to remember this is you're always going to move the decimal place 2 places over. So 0.025 times 7. And we get I is equal to 1,050. What's our total investment worth? Well, that is 6,000 plus 1,050, which turns out to be $7,050 will be the total value invested for 7 years. All right, folks, well, that's the end of simple interest. And now just note that sometimes you'll be asked to find R or T, and that's, again, you would just divide. If you knew the I value, you knew the P value, you divide by the remaining values to be able to isolate for R and T. Okay, moving on, we'll move on to, we'll just try one more example for you folks. So, here we go. All right, let's one more example. What we're looking at is Emily wants to have $100 interest from $1,000 invested at 5% interest per annum, simple interest. How long should she invest her money for? So we need to know how long Emily should invest her money. Well, let's look and see how long she needs to invest her money. That is, how do we know what formula to use? Well, it says, folks, simple interest. Simple interest, we know that it's $1,000, which represents our P value. $100 interest represents our I value. Again, every capital letter involves a dollar value. And we have a rate of interest of 5%. So, I represents 100. P represents 1,000. R represents 0.05. T represents what we don't know. We need to know how long it will take for her to get $100. So how long should she invest her money? Well, let's fill in the formula. I equals PRT means I got 100 equals 1,000 times 0.05 or 0.05 times T. So we need to isolate for T. That is, we keep T on this side, and then we take 100 and divide that by what was next to T on the other side. That is 1,000 times 0.05. So we're going to take 100 and divide it by 1,000 times 0.05. What is our T value? Well, we find out that our T value is 2. What does that mean? Well, that means that Emily has to invest her money for 2 years in order for her to have $100 interest. Okay, folks, that's all for now. Have a numerical day.